Hello, this is Melissa Fuller with Shape of the City. I am at Sage Nutrition. I am with Emily Estes.
Hi.
And we are going to be talking about eating disorders. Emily, can you tell us what are the main types of eating disorders that people should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're probably more familiar with anorexia, bulimia are kind of common, but actually the most prevalent eating disorder is binge eating disorder. And then kind of more more prevalent right now is ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, as well as orthorexia. Isn't a specific diagnosis at this point in time, but really a focus on trying to be healthy, and it's something that we're seeing a lot more often within clients.
Can you talk about those other disorders that we don't know as much about?
Yeah, so ARFID is something we see a lot more like in kiddos. We see it a lot in the population of individuals who struggle with like Asperger's or autism. And so it's more of a fear of like texture or maybe specific flavors of food. And so it's more of a sensory issue with the food. So it's not necessarily a body image component. Same with orthorexia, like there's not really a body image component to that, but it's more of this hyper focus on wanting to eat healthy. So we might start eliminating a lot more foods in this quest to eat really specific, what we would typically deem as healthy foods. So where it becomes so restrictive that it starts to impact health and well-being.
All right.
Yeah.
Are there certain people that are more prone to eating disorders than others?
Yeah, so maybe two populations that I would highlight would be adolescents who are going through puberty, bodies are changing, that can be uncomfortable and scary and just unknown of what that's like, and just with our culture kind of focus on body image. So, and then women in that kind of premenopausal time also, where again, like the body is beginning to shift and change, and that might be uncomfortable. So those would be two populations kind of focus on of maybe high risk for those disordered eating or eating disorders.
And you've said to me in the past, it doesn't discriminate. So eating disorders can really affect anyone,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Any age, any type, any background,
yeah.
right?
So we have kiddos, as young as 7, 8 years old, work with elderly individuals as well, so up to, people in their 80s, 90s. So it really can impact any age, gender, sexuality, anything like that. It doesn't discriminate.
What are the big risks that are tied to certain eating disorders?
Yeah, so certainly anytime somebody has a genetic predisposition, so if eating disorders run in that family, that can be a high risk factor. Culture plays a role into that. Anytime we're going through big life changes, we might be turning to food or body image. When people feel kind of out of control or like they don't have control in something in their life, sometimes we feel like the only thing we can control is the food that we're putting in our body or like the size of our body. So those can be some risk factors that might lead somebody to engage in eating disorder behaviors, just trying to control and manage their own body and feel like they have control of something.
In terms of just how an eating disorder can affect people as well, like physically, emotionally, what should people be aware of? Yeah,
so I think you highlighted well, physically, emotionally, mentally, all of those are going to kind of play a role. So we often see eating disorders alongside of depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD. So it's really, encompasses a lot of that mental health. But physical sometimes, we don't want to look at somebody's size of their body, or like we can't look at the outside of somebody and see what's going on. So they could be experiencing, low blood sugar. They could be having heart issues, losing hair, just low energy. There could be a lot of things head to toe that's being impacted because of the lack of nutrients going into their body. And so we really want to be paying attention to that. But also with their mental health and that kind of depression, anxiety, it's kind of a vicious cycle that all of those things feed into each other.
If there's a loved one out there that may be concerned, or what are the things they should be looking for someone maybe that's close to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So things that we might notice in individuals who are struggling, maybe they begin to isolate themselves, starting to avoid places where we would be eating with other people, start to restrict certain foods or eliminate food groups, maybe just higher anxiety. Sometimes in kiddos we see maybe at the table they're becoming a little bit more anxious anxious or explosive is a term I've heard recently with patients of it's just really tense and stressful to be in that environment. So whenever we're seeing more higher stress around food or body image concerns, that can be a red flag. If people are, going to the bathroom right after meals, might be purging their meals or having obsessive exercise tendencies, those are all things that could be red flags that they're having a struggle with food.
So again, if a loved one now is concerned and they're ready for that next step, getting help, or if there's a viewer out there that may need help, what's that next step for them?
I definitely recommend working with a provider who's experienced in this. So we have the Nebraska Eating Disorder Network where you can find providers across the state who are well educated in this field and can help in that regard. So, and making sure that we have a cohesive treatment team. So you want to have a therapist, a doctor, if a psychiatrist or medication provider is necessary, along with your registered dietitian, so that you can have all aspects of that eating disorder being addressed collectively and making sure you're kind of treating the holistic issue there.
And anything else for the general public too? Are there any big misconceptions that go along with eating disorders that maybe the public can help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now, just in our culture, we're seeing the shift of, wanting to be healthy. And that's a great concept, and we want people to be healthy, but we're seeing that taken to such an extreme. And so I think of not being afraid of food, we want to kind of fix those myths of kind of speaking into, we don't need to be afraid of food, but really trying to build a healthy relationship with food. So I always tell clients food is meant to nourish our body, not nurture us. So whenever we're seeing that we're going to food for that nurture, comfort, kind of in a habitual sense, we might want to start looking at that relationship that we have with food and maybe seeking out some help. So it's always better to get help before it becomes a bigger issue when you have that opportunity.
And I know, there have been problems in the past too where people may not take eating disorders serious enough as well, or is that still an issue, do you think?
Definitely. I think one of the common things we hear is I'm not sick enough to get help. So sometimes people feel like if I'm not in an emaciated body, then I don't deserve help or I don't need help because my body may not demonstrate outwardly that something is wrong. And so that's a huge misconception, is that there can be so much going on inside. Eating disorders have one of the highest mortality rates among psychiatric illnesses. And so that's one of the things is when we start messing with our food and electrolyte intake, like our heart can stop on a dime. So understanding that the risk, sometimes you might not have a lot of lead time into understanding what that risk is. So knowing that your body can only fight off the behaviors for so long with an eating disorder, but they can be really deadly. So recognizing that there is really severe potential consequences for engaging in behaviors with eating disorders.
And you do also work with people in terms of their body image. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that can be one of the precursors to eating disorder. So when we start looking at a disordered relationship with food and body, it's a great time to get help. So I love working with people, again, kind of that precursor. We want to be on a prevention side of things. So in recognizing if I'm really struggling with my body image, my body's changing, different stages of life, of working through what are those perceived body images that we have, what are our ideal body images, and understanding how that impacts how we see ourselves. I think we put so much focus on our outward appearance that we miss out on the opportunity to really explore what's happening on the inside, mentally, physically, emotionally.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Are there any other last message you'd like to leave with our viewers, whether they are dealing with an eating disorder or a loved one, or maybe someone who may not have enough information out there?
Absolutely. I always tell people also nothing is insignificant in this journey. So if something happened as a child that still impacts you, your relationship with food and body, that's relevant, and you don't need to wait to get help. There's a lot of benefit in addressing the issue more immediately, and it can impact, this can also be a generational struggle. So if you have kids or you have nieces, nephews, we have the opportunity to really change that generational tide in how we perceive food and body. So we want there to be a healthy focus in our conversation and focus around around food and body, and the sooner that we start to make those changes, the better for not just us, but also the people around us that we love and care for.
So there is also Eating Disorder Awareness Week
Yes.
in February.
Yep.
Where can people go to learn about maybe things going on in Nebraska, events going on in Nebraska?
Absolutely. So they're welcome to check out our social media. Also, the Nebraska Eating Disorder Network has Facebook page, so we'll be posting a lot on there also about the events that'll be happening, Omaha, Lincoln, UNL campus. So we'll be sharing those throughout the month too to give people a heads up.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.